So my S13 has been running a R200 diff with the Wear Performance spool in it and some custom flanges to adapt it to 350Z axles. If I just drive it really hard and if I turn the nitrous on, it just can't support that horsepower. So I've gone through quite a few diffs. It's really the ring and pinion that breaks. Everything else is fine, but I just can't seem to find a good enough ring gear to fit the R200 that's strong enough to be abused over and over again at events like Grid Life and any of the practice days that I do. It's either one of the axles or the ring and pinion. So I'm done with that. I got some time. We're gonna address that and we're gonna make this car super, super solid. It's already got a really badass LS3 in it. It's got a good dog box transmission. It's got nitrous. The missing link was a really strong rear end and some Driveshaft Shop axles. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get this bad boy to somehow fit inside of the subframe, and that's going inside the S13. We already pulled out the subframe and the fuel tank. The factory fuel tank was right here, and if we put a quick change in it, the rear cover would impede on the factory fuel tank. So that's out. We got a really cool unit coming from Radium Engineering. That should be here later this week. First, we're gonna address the quick change though, and that's gonna determine where the fuel cell sits. So I'm gonna get cracking on trying to mock up this quick change to fit inside an S13. I've never put a quick change inside of an S13. I've done it in all my S14s, obviously did it in the S15, but the S13 is a little bit different under here. There's not as much room over here. I'm seeing the S14 fuel tank sits above the diff, so naturally this area is a lot bigger. There's a lot more space, it seems like, on the S14. This looks a little bit smaller for sure, so I think it's gonna be a challenge, but I think it's gonna pay off when I start driving this thing with a quick change. Diff where it's at in that general location. I made a few marks so that way once we have the subframe and the diff out of the car, we kind of know approximately where I wanted it to be. So here's a mark that lines up with the mark on the cover. This is a ring gear preload adjustment, and that lines up with the subframe here. Let's pull this thing back out of the car, put it on the fab table, start taking some more precise measurements and jig it up to the subframe. So I got the subframe and diff back out and I mated them together. Roughly the positioning that we had when it was in the car looked pretty good, so I put it on the workbench. I squared it up with the tape measure a little bit better so we have a truer, more precise fit, and I went ahead and I just for now tack welded some tabs to the actual diff. We're borrowing this bar that I had from a previous subframe. That's just tack welded to the subframe as well, but it's square. It's exactly where I want it to be. It's off to the passenger side a little bit to allow space for the sway bar, for the OEM style sway bar, and everything is positioned the way I want it. So I want to put it back in the car, make sure that we have all the clearances that I'm hoping to have, and we have space for this thing. And I want to double check one more time the angle of the diff to make sure we have proper pinion angle. If everything's good, we'll pull it back out and put some real actual mounts to the subframe that attach the differential permanently. I feel like we're getting somewhere. So the diff and the subframe are in the car. Just once again, the subframe or the diff is just tack welded into the subframe, but it's looking great in here. I'm digging all the angles. So another cool part is that the S15 drive shaft fits into this S13 now, which is great because you know, there's definitely less variety of parts that I got to use in between all my cars. So I'm totally happy with the pinion angle. It's definitely between 1 and 3 degrees. It's very small, but there is some pinion angle, which is good. You don't want 0. So stoked. I'm gonna pull this thing back out and start making the real mounts that attach the diff into the subframe. Got the diff back in the subframe. There's one more mount left and this thing's done. It's already in here, it's solid, but we're gonna build a mount right off the front of the subframe here to pick up on these 3 bolts right here to really hold the snout of the subframe in place. And this mount's, I think, really crucial. Yeah, it's in here, it's sturdy, but this right here, if you do it right, really helps all the torque and all the power that goes through this thing to keep it all squared up inside of the subframe. So after making this cardboard template and fitting it, I went ahead and made these out of 2 pieces because honestly I didn't have metal that was thick enough, and having 1 piece and then a laminate to go right over it that we will weld all the way around here and obviously around the perimeter, I think will work really well. It'll give it a lot of strength, and I think it looks pretty cool too. Very happy about the way this turned out. I got a bend in here, so it's got a little bit more rigidity, and this is 2 layers, and you can see it's rosette welded right here and rosette welded all the way around the inside as well. So very confident about this mount. I wanted the rear mount to be very sturdy. I feel like this is going to be doing a lot of the job, not only from the diff going up and down, but I was very concerned about it torsioning to the side from torque. So I didn't want to use just regular tabs. I just went crazy and ran the 1.5" DOM tubing that I used for the roll cage in the S13 to fab up these mounts. So yeah, this is super sturdy, really happy about it. And it picks up on the subframe really close to where the subframe goes to the chassis. And I wanted to do that so that there's less chance of it. The closer it is, I feel like the sturdier it is. And then lastly, I got a mount that's gonna grab underneath the diff. It's gonna go underneath the bottom, and it's also gonna serve as a skid plate, which I'm stoked on because I'm not too thrilled about being cautious and scared about dirt dropping in the demo car and taking out the diff. So this bad boy is gonna sit right under it. There's mounts for the diff to bolt to, so it's gonna have some extra rigidity for the diff, and it's also going to serve as a skid plate. And that picks up on the same bolt that the toe arms go to, so it's really easy to remove. Here's what it looks like. I also machined some lockout washers and just ran a little bead to lock out the toe adjustment there, because it's super annoying when the toe adjustment walks with the factory centric. Those holes from the factory are slotted like that for the toe adjustment as well. We obviously have adjustable links and arms. I don't want the eccentric to start moving. Those are super annoying to adjust, so it's locked out, it's not moving, and this bolts right up to it. Can't wait till you get this thing all painted up, cleaned up first, then sprayed with some Steelit. We're gonna probably spray it with the Steelit black, and then get it back in the car. So after a few solid days of fab work, the diff is finally in the car and it's looking awesome. I'm so stoked to have a quick change diff in my demo car. It's definitely a game changer. And the reason we went through all this trouble of putting the quick change in is so it's a lot stronger. It's got a huge 10-inch ring gear in it versus the R200 has a slightly smaller than 8-inch ring gear in it. So hopefully no more busting ring and pinions. And this allowed us to run some really beefy Driveshaft Shop Axles as well. And I already had these. These were the spares from the S13. So I had an extra set instead of them sitting on the shelf while I'm taking a break from driving this because I'll be driving the new S15. I went ahead and repurposed some of the spares like the axles. This diff is actually the spare diff from the S14 as well. After putting the axles in, we went ahead and went to a bigger hub. We went to a 300ZX hub, which is also a great improvement because they're way stronger. Other than that, the biggest advantage of having a quick change is to be able to change the gear sets. So when you take the rear cover off, here you have 2 gear sets. If these 2 gears are the same size, that means you are running the same ratio as the ring and pinion. This has a 412 ring and pinion in there. So if these both gears have the same tooth count, we'd be running 412 to the actual wheels. As you see here, there's a 29 tooth gear. It says it right on the gear, and a 26. That means we are changing the actual ratio that goes to the wheels. And you could change that ratio super easily. You simply slip the gears off, grab another pair of gears and slip them on. You never want to mix and match gear sets. They always have to stay together. So this one's a 21, 26. Make sure to keep those together. You don't want to take a 26 and then a 29 out of a different gear set and vice versa. And they have like a serial number on each gear set, so you make sure that you keep those serial numbers matching. Okay. So there used to be a fuel tank here. This is just the floorboard. We had to remove that because the original fuel tank was super close to the diff. Actually, I don't think with the cover, the fuel tank would even fit back in here. So we'll get to that later. But other than that, this thing's in here, and check it out. You even got the sway bar back in here, which is awesome. Everything is in there like it should. The exhaust lines up. We didn't have to really do anything else besides notching the chassis a little bit, and obviously quite a bit of fab work to the subframe itself. But hey, it's worth it. It's in there. It's ready to go. So can't wait to get the drive shaft back, put that in, put some oil in this thing, and then obviously onto the fuel cell.